Pollution is very high on the Chinese government's agenda. China's EV market is reaping the benefits. Let's talk more about this with the IHS Markit's Asia Pacific Managing Director James Chao joining us in Shanghai. You know, it's fascinating, isn't it? The sort of reaction that you see across corporations, across the market once you have government backing for a certain policy. We saw the pitfalls of that with solar power in China, the amount of subsidies and the overcapacity that was subsequently created. Is there a danger that there's too much fervour going into, green energy and green energy cars in particular at the moment?
Absolutely. There is a danger, and part of it is that there's massive cost involved in terms of the subsidies that are placed on these electric vehicles. And it's the subsidies that are driving the sales of electric vehicles in China. 500,000 so far sold this year, but that has been very expensive to the government. So the long-term outlook still is uncertain in terms of what the results of this electric vehicle national policy will be.
Yeah, even just anecdotally, I know so many people that decided to buy an electric vehicle even though they had 3 other, normal cars because it was cheap and because you could get a free number plate that you can use on the days that you can't drive your other cars. So do you think if you strip out these incentives, what's the level of demand that you're seeing and will it pick up?
It would be far lower, and you make a good point about the license plates. The license plates in large Chinese cities are restricted in terms of how they're issued. And when you buy an electric vehicle, you get one free immediately. So this creates a distortion in the market where people want to purchase these for perhaps not the reason why, or not for the reason that the government intended, which was to further their environmental agenda. So this is a distortion in the normal supply and demand market.
James, are electric cars a panacea for these environmental issues that the Chinese government has outlined? Surely it just puts the pollution somewhere else.
That's also a very good point. So the electric vehicles themselves, the pure electric vehicles, that is, don't emit any CO2 emissions. That's great, and that's great for that local area, but where do the emissions go? It takes a massive amount of electricity to produce, to drive these electric vehicles. And how is this electricity produced? Well, in China, that is mostly, at this stage, via coal energy, coal-fired plants. And this creates a situation where the pollution is essentially moved from where the vehicle is driven to where the electricity is produced.
Which begs the question, is the internal combustion engine more efficient than some of these coal power plants and taking that raw fuel and converting it into energy? That's key here. It's almost as if China's doing this too soon.
Well, one overlooked area, and you also bring up another good point, is the advances in the internal combustion engine have been pretty good over the last decade or two. And they've become a lot more efficient, especially with hybrid technology, and much more cost competitive than most electric vehicles. So in some ways, China is overlooking another solution to the CO2 emissions problem, which is enhanced conventional vehicle technology.
James, I think you make a really interesting point in your notes that, yes, China's gone all in when it comes to this. It tends to go all in when, it comes out with a new policy across industry. But part of it is this kind of, symbolism, right? It wants to be this global leader. So it's happening regardless of what levels of consumer demand is being gauged.
That's right. 5 years ago, China embarked on this journey. And it was called leapfrogging over the other countries' automotive technology. And they chose electric vehicle technology as the technology that would allow them to surpass the automakers from other countries. So they made this bet a few years ago, and they're continuing with it. And it's a real national strategy. I mean, they put a lot of pride into this. And that shouldn't be overlooked, that they've really committed to this So I don't see them backing down from this at all in the coming years.
We've seen quite a bit of resilience across overall China auto demand this year. Have you sort of made any, I guess, assumptions about what demand is going to look like going into next year, given how fast the policy landscape seems to be changing?
Well, yeah, we see, so we're in November now, and we're already seeing some weakness in the market compared to last year, primarily due to an expiration of a tax cut last year, or a rollback of a tax cut last year, which pulled a lot of sales into the end of 2016. So the comparison to this year, 2017, is very tough. Now, as we go into next year, I do sense some fatigue in the market, if you will, that there have been a lot of incentives by the automakers. There have been a lot of regulatory changes, tax cuts. But I think the base demand in the short term will probably be flat to slightly growing. Not the gangbusters that we saw a decade ago, where we saw double-digit percentage growths every year. I think now we're coming to a more status quo type of level.
One thing which would worry environmental authorities there in China is that any growth that there is seemingly comes from SUV sales. That's not good for them, is it?
Well, you know, as much as China and the U.S. are different, one element which is the same in terms of the car market, that is the love of the SUV. China has gone crazy over SUVs. Now, the SUVs here aren't nearly as large as the ones that you see in the United States, but they are larger than the normal passenger vehicle. So those vehicles often are less fuel efficient. So this does create a situation where consumers are demanding less fuel-efficient vehicles, that is the SUV, and this creates a conundrum for the policymakers.